The Great Lakes. These massive inland seas contain 1/5 of all the world's fresh water. Big enough to create their own weather, often bad.
If a storm is coming across the big lake, there's really nothing to stop that energy from building up. It's very deep, it's very cold, it can turn in a second.
And for those unfortunate enough to be crossing at the wrong time, the ride can be deadly. Since the 1600s, an estimated 8,000 ships have gone down, killing as many as 30,000 people.
This area was just notorious to eating ships and big storms. Because those relics still are on the bottom, this is the coastline for their graveyard.
Every year, a team from the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum goes in search of sunken vessels. On this expedition, they're surveying the waters of Lake Superior, the largest and deepest of all the Great Lakes. Bruce Lynn is the executive director of the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum team.
The way we search for shipwrecks out here in Lake Superior is we pull a sonar behind our research vessel, and that sonar covers a certain swath on the bottom of the lake. But in order to do this, we have to go back and forth. We may not see anything for days. We may not see anything for a couple of years. It's almost like if you were on a lawnmower mowing your lawn. You could see where the blades have cut that grass and it has created that pattern. So it allows us to see the bottom of the lake, and if we're fortunate enough to actually find a shipwreck, we can go back, use the lower frequency, get a closer look, and then we can turn around and put our ROV down, and we can actually get a better idea of what we're actually seeing.
An ROV, or remotely operated vehicle, is engineered to search at depths too great for divers. The submersible feeds live images back to the team, who scan for anything unusual.
Maybe it's not a shipwreck at all. It might be a big pile of rocks, a big clay formation on the bottom of the lake, which there's plenty of that. It's not often you look at it the first time around and absolutely know, oh my gosh, this is a shipwreck. But there are times where that's the case.
And in the summer of 2021, that was precisely the case when the team made a major discovery. The CF Curtis. A cargo ship that hasn't been seen since 1914. Like other steamers of the time, the Curtis was built for navigation and endurance.
In 1914, there was a tremendous amount of ship traffic on the lakes, period. World War I was just getting underway at that point. Many of these communities were still growing on the Great Lakes. Commerce was getting busier, busier, busier. And the lakes themselves, and Lake Superior, you can look at as a big highway system.
When the Curtis left port, she had two other vessels in tow, the Marvin and the Peterson. Their cargo, 3 million board feet of lumber and a crew of 28.
You had many cases where you'd have one ship, a steamship, that could be pulling barges with heavy-duty ropes attached to them to connect them all together, like a little flotilla of ships traveling on the lake. But that was pretty common because it was a more economically sound, cheaper way to transport those raw materials.
With the Curtis, as soon as we saw it with the side scan and we measured the length of it and saw that it was a steamer, we knew what it was right away, without putting the ROV down.
That's awesome, man.
because there's nothing else in the area that would have been that size. So sometimes you just know.
The detailed survey revealed a sunken vessel after more than 100 years on the lake bed. The bow still intact and the anchor still stowed. Spokes of the ship's wheel, once used to change course. Engine and steam gauges, eerily frozen in time.
The Curtis was pretty typical for its day. It was a workhorse, it was doing its job, but it certainly wasn't the newest ship, and it could find itself probably in trouble if the weather got really, really bad. They would really want to try to find a shelter if they could.
Rick Mixter is an author and historian whose focus is investigating and documenting shipwrecks of the Great Lakes.
So Curtis, Marvin, and Peterson all pull into the Baraga area. 3 different docks are now loading 3 million board feet of lumber. The problem with lumber is, first of all, the volume. They would pack the inside of the ship, they'd pack the top part of the deck, and try to tow this through an area that could have very horrible storms.
Soon after their departure, a major storm swept through Lake Superior.
It's up to the captains, really, to make the decision on when to go. They were very much meteorologists, where they would check the barometric pressure. They would watch the gauges in the pilot house to see if it was going low, if a big storm was coming. Even in 1914, though, we had fairly good weather reports where they could kind of say, it looks like it's going to be good. And if you look at the November 18th forecast, it said fair skies and maybe some snow. So when Captain Jennings decided to go, it was probably a good call. But unfortunately, the lakes can change on a dime.
Could a freak November storm have taken down these 3 mighty ships?
Because of our lakes getting much warmer in the summertime and they start to cool, the evaporation causes extreme moisture to go into the air as we see these Arctic storms come down from Canada. This feeds into a time between October and November to create storm systems that are unparalleled. So we regularly see storms that come in that could blow for 2 days at 60 to almost 120 miles an hour.
Newspaper articles from the time start to reveal the big picture.
We start to see headlines from especially the papers around Detroit where the captain is overdue. And then we start to see debris that comes in and the lifesaver reports come in. So that's where we start to learn the real tragedy of this November gale, that there's now 28 people who've lost their lives on 3 different ships, and most of the Heinz fleet.
We don't really know, but there's a belief that Captain Jennings on board the Curtis was trying to steer that group into Grand Marais to get in and out of the conditions. That would have been about the only harbor that he would have had between leaving Baraga in the other side of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan and making his way to Whitefish Point, and then eventually the Sioux Locks and down to Tonawanda, New York, where all 3 of those vessels were destined to go. The weather clearly played a huge part and was really the reason those ships sank.
The 3 ships were a total loss, a trail of destruction left in their wake.
A lot of these shipwrecks, you read the newspapers from the day, do your research, and you can get ideas of either where they sank and get ideas of what happened on the final moments before the ship broke up and sank, and often those are pretty dramatic stories.
We start to see things that normally wouldn't be cast into the lake, and this goes out into massive areas around the shipwreck. So we'll see incredible things like personal effects of the crew. We also saw an actual grinding stone, a hand-cranked grinding stone, which could have been used to sharpen the axe that was used to sever the line of these tow vessels. So to see something that might have been directly involved in the actual wrecking process, it's amazing to see it. Every little piece that we find on the bottom, it's all a piece of the history that's been lost down here for 100 years. And we learn about the people, we learn about the technology of that time period, we learn about the industry of lumber that was really on its way out from Michigan at this point. So these are all locked into a time capsule 460 feet down. The debris field here, to me, it humanizes the shipwreck.
Over to the ship.
This shows us this is a place where people lived, and aside from having any trace of a crewman, you know, this is what really shows us that this is where people lived, breathed, worked, and it's just amazing to see the bits and pieces that are out there, and it tells a story every time.
But finding the Curtis only tells part of the story. The Marvin and the Peterson also disappeared during that fateful storm. The team spent another year combing the area, looking for the other two vessels. Finally, a clue.
We left Whitefish Point early in the morning and we started searching our monster grid, and we saw an image almost a half-mile out, but it didn't look like a shipwreck. Didn't have a shadow. Yeah, so we got to come at it north-south. It was unique enough to where we turned around and went look at it. We went right over the top of it, and it was definitely a shipwreck. Look at it.
Yeah, huge.
There's the bow right there.
Huge.
It was pretty exciting because we didn't expect to find anything. We were just towing the sonar just to go get fuel. All right, we're coming up on it for the first time.
So how long that day had you been searching?
This is about the 7th hour.
Wow.
Okay.
And how many miles from the Curtis wreck?
5.
We got a shipwreck, buddy. Finally, you got one. See, I spotted that thing. I told you. It was by that other debris field we were looking at.
Oh my God, that's a shipwreck. If we go to the next side scanning, because we pass it 3 or 4 times, so we zoom in again. Now we know it's a ship, we're gonna try to go down the side of it.
Sure.
It could be the Peterson or the Marvin that we were looking for. That is awesome. This image gives us a really good side view of the shadow.
That's amazing.
Even though I cut the ship in
Yeah.
half, you see all the mast standing right there in the bow.
And look how that's torn off right there.
The stern
too.
is torn apart, but you can still see the 2 scupper holes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Look at the damage.
So
to the
that means
back.
we're looking right through that side.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or was this ripped off as the center vessel in a tow?
They are one step closer to solving the mystery of what happened to either the Marvin or the Peterson in 1914. But still, they need proof. The following day, they head out again. The team has located their wreck. Now they need to figure out which one of these 2 ships pictured in the lineup behind the Curtis is lying on the sea floor.
To try to better understand how the Marvin sank, how the Curtis went down, how the Peterson sank, we don't really know. There are certain clues that we can pick up when we put the ROV down.
That's the back of the boat. Yeah.
Can we drop some shades?
Yes, please.
In the control room, the shipwreck team can watch the live feed.
165. We just search back and forth, and then forth and back.
The ROV descends to depths of almost 650 feet.
You can actually zoom in and see the bottom of the lake.
Giving them their first up-close look at their suspected target.
What we're hoping we're going to be seeing here is one of the 2 schooner barges that the Curtis was towing. So with any luck, we'll see some identifying characteristics, and hopefully we'll see a name board.
We're sitting right over the wreck, it looks like. Actually, we're coming up on the blue line, so we're 200 feet from the bottom. I'm going towards the shipwreck, so do you feel me pulling any line? I got 40 feet to go to get to it. Coming up on the hull.
Yep. Oh, look at that. We know it's wood. Sitting up nicely off the bottom of the lake.
I'm trying to come up. Don't keep feeding me.
Nice image there. We're the first to see it since World War I.
Those are scupper holes.
Nice square scupper holes.
If you look at the sonar, it looks like it's the crow's nest up above it, too.
Yeah, it kind of does.
See, that's a 30-foot well.
Yep.
Oh!
Lumber.
Oh,
There
yeah.
you go. 3 million board feet were on the 3 vessels when it went down.
It's like some cables.
That's rigging from the mast.
Some nice white paint.
We're in the bow.
Yeah.
That should be the letters.
Yeah, it could be. You're talking right here, right?
Yeah.
Oh, wait a minute,
Nice.
now. Look at that. Oh, my God, that is
amazing.
fantastic.
Heinz lumber right across the top, and then right
Yeah.
here.
Well, we know it's one of the two.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing the Peterson here.
I want to go around the bow to look at the name on the other side. There's a tow line tied to the front bitts.
Look at that.
Oh, yeah.
But that's incredible to think that's what severed.
All right, I'm gonna head towards the stern. So I'm coming back to where we started.
If the tow line is at the stern, then we're looking at the Peterson.
So we hope we have the order of what they are.
Yeah, and that could be, sometimes your sources will tell you different things. It's amazing how many times you read those newspaper articles from the day and you get completely different stories. I still am amazed sometimes at the colors.
I think those are letters in the white.
I thought so too.
Oh, look
Oh
at this.
my God.
Marvin.
It's the Marvin! Oh my gosh.
Oh, that
is
incredible.
fantastic. That is great. Mystery solved.
Wow.
That's beautiful.
That is cool. Even though we're not divers and we're on the wreck, through the camera on this ROV, we're the first human eyes to look at this thing since 1914.
Looks like the stern got pulled apart.
Yeah, it sure does.
Look at it, it's got that same rudder post. Boy, it did break the stern right up. I thought so. That's because it was towing.
This should have been last in line.
That's what I thought too.
You don't know now.
You know, that's easy that those sources could have been wrong.
Yeah.
And I bet if we read enough articles, we'd find the one that said the order was reversed.
If you see a tow line on it, I think that would be
Boy, that is really ripped up.
wow.
I have to imagine this thing sank really fast. The way the stern is ripped out of the back of the Marvin here, that does make us wonder, did the Peterson sink first and then tear the stern out of the Marvin?
That could be a
part
tow
of an
line.
anchor there.
That's the
a
tow line.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
a tow line.
Wow.
What do we have there? Almost looks like a piece of canvas or
Yeah.
something.
Looks like a jacket or something.
Yeah.
Yep, that was
More
the tow
line.
line we saw in the side scan.
That's pretty impressive.
I'm at the top of the mast. I'll start back to the surface.
My pulse rate can go back down now. And yet we still get surprised. I would have put all money on Peterson.
Peterson, yeah.
I wanted the Peterson bad.
Yeah.
We think about a lot of different things when we look at that ship, the way it is sitting on the bottom of the lake. You can see parts of that vessel that were the living quarters, the work locations or the workspaces on board that ship. So you think a little bit about the people that were working there, what was going through their minds in those last minutes. Did they know that their ship was about to break up and sink? Did they have any idea what was happening to the other vessels around them? But by looking at that ship, it tells us a lot about the vessel itself, the architecture of a ship of that type, let alone the clues that it gives us as to what eventually happened to it.
The Marvin was a real surprise for me because not only was it missing most of its upper deck, but we didn't know which ship it could be. The revelation was immediately that the Marvin was not the last vessel in the tow, that they must have been in the middle because of the two tow lines that we saw and because of the massive damage that had been done. We also saw the deck completely missing. Was it a capsizing ship that pulled not only on the Curtis's back end, but also maybe did damage to the Peterson as well? There's still things that need to be done. You've got a crew that would be very excited to go back and actually see what else can be found there. The question is, where's the Peterson? All of these start to get answered as we bring these clues up from the bottom. As our robot goes down and records what's there, that starts to bring new information up for us to tell more of those stories. By finding these clues, that helps us to really tell what happened to all three ships.
Now that we have positively identified the Selden E. Marvin on this beautiful day out here in Lake Superior, I think we should probably take a moment to remember Captain Fred Anderson and his crew of 6 that was on board this vessel when it went down. So let's have a moment of silence to remember them. Our captain here on the buoy, Daryl's going to give a salute to that crew of 7. And let's also remember the crew of the Peterson and also of the Curtis as well.
The sudden and violent storms of the Great Lakes have taken down thousands of ships, never to be seen again. But as technology has improved over the past decades, wreck investigators are beginning to shed light on these lost but not forgotten souls. In Lake Michigan, a group of divers descends into the lake, pushing safe limits to unlock a secret. A secret that faded into history for more than a century. What they discovered was the final chapter in an unbelievable journey that started in 2010. When a wreck hunter happened upon a clue of a lifetime. Brendan Baylod, a maritime historian, spent years combing through written and oral reports. Brendan's target, a 300-foot giant, a massive ship that vanished in Lake Michigan in 1898. The L.R. Doty. She was one of the last wooden steamships, built at the end of the 19th century, when shipbuilding was moving from wooden sailing ships to steel steamers.
The L.R. Doty was a massive wooden freighter. It took over 50 acres of white oak to build that ship. She was nearly 300 feet long and really kind of the boxcar of her day. They spared no expense in building the Doty and her sisters because they really were kind of the pride of the fleet at the time and some of the largest vessels on the lakes in the early 1890s.
The Doty's trips on the Great Lakes spread far and wide, often carrying her primary cargo of iron ore and coal. For additional cargo capacity, the Doty always towed a 4-masted barge, the Olive Jeanette. Vessels often went out in conditions that were less than ideal.
People think the Great Lakes are just this placid lake, beautiful with light waves. When they do see these storms move in, and this beautiful lake turns into this massive fury of waves that are 35 or 40 feet tall, they just don't understand that the lakes can harbor that much energy and turn it into a storm.
But no matter the conditions, the ships had to sail, especially during the colder months.
First had to go on when the weather got bad. These vessels that we're talking about were commercial vessels. They had to move. They had to generate income. They couldn't sit around. And so they were forced out into situations where the local yachtsman or somebody might not go.
Great Lakes lore abounds with legends of ships struck down by bad weather. Such was the case with the L.R. Doty. Brendan Baylod stumbles across a harrowing tale in a Chicago newspaper, dated October 1898.
I was researching and found an early periodical that contained a fascinating first-person account from the cook of the Olive Jeanette.
The cook was identified as Frances Brown. From a century away, her words, taken down by a reporter, float off the page.
When a line parted and the Doty began to leave us, I could see her stern sinking. I knew she would never see land then. I thought we would never see land either.
Brendan notices another puzzling aspect to this woman's account. In the newspaper, she's listed as Miss Frances Brown.
We find her in the Olive Jeanette crew list as Frankie Waters, cook. I'm pretty sure that her real name was Frankie Waters.
We hadn't any business going out into that weather last Monday.
She was apparently unwilling to give her real name to a reporter. But what interests Brendan most about Frankie Waters has nothing to do with the woman herself. It's her description of the L.R. Doty sinking in a place where no one expected it, more than 60 miles north of Chicago, near Milwaukee.
And that changed the whole landscape of the L.R. Doty for me, because prior to that, we had no real solid account of where she was last seen.
Everyone assumed the Doty went down further south, off Kenosha, where much of her debris washed up.
Here, we show where the debris was found from the L.R. Doty 40 hours after she was last seen. Up here, we see where Frankie Waters last reported seeing the L.R. Doty. Based on the wind direction, I've figured that she would be right about where this X is.
Many failed looking for this sunken giant. And Brendan's research revealed why. They were looking in the wrong place.
Hey, Jerry!
Brendan teamed up with diver Jerry Geyer to help him narrow down the search field.
What you got?
We always thought she was off Kenosha, because that's where the debris was found, but the account says she was last seen 7 miles north of Milwaukee.
But saying the Doty went down off Milwaukee left a vast potential search area. That's where Jerry's recent findings came into play.
Here's my numbers. A commercial fisherman talking about one of their major snags out here, and he gave me the numbers, said that I should check it out. Now, I went out and I went over it, and it stands off the bottom 20-some feet, and it's large.
I really think that's the...
Was this target on the bottom of Lake Michigan the missing L.R. Doty? With the combined findings, Brendan approached Jitka Hanakova, a deep-water wreck diver from the Czech Republic.
Said, look, this is where the L.R. Doty is probably located. And I said, well, that's about 300 feet down, quite diveable. We can go down and find out for sure.
On a crisp September morning, they made their final gear checks. With limited space on the boat, Brendan had to sit this one out.
So just try to get what Brandon wants out of the wreck, so we get at least good shots of what we need.
The skies were darkening.
This is Molly B.
Captain Hanakova takes a chance that the weather won't get worse.
We are open for good seas also. Over.
Over a century ago, the captains of the L.R. Doty and the Olive Jeanette took a similar chance. On a blustery October afternoon, they sailed north from Chicago with a cargo of corn worth $1 million today.
October was a time on the lakes where they really needed to get cargoes delivered in the fall. There was a big demand for them, and it was not at all uncommon to overload ships to try to get a lot of grain in late in the season. There was a couple of reports that the Doty was significantly overloaded, and I have no reason to doubt them.
It's a moneymaker for the captain, but only if he reaches his final destination. Riding low makes them susceptible to the waves that can strike this time of year. 100 years ago, the Department of Agriculture published daily weather maps, and updates were sent via telegraph to major shipping ports. But once a captain sets sail, he's on his own.
We didn't have technology where they could transmit the weather conditions at that time to the folks who were on the Great Lakes. So they were left with what information was available, which was merely looking at the sky and the wind direction and the warm temperatures. They had to sail off of their gut instinct.
Even today, it's hard to know how Great Lakes weather might change from hour to hour.
I'm just going to hang on the surface to you. I see you guys descending from 20.
24 miles southeast of Milwaukee, surrounded by a vast expanse of Lake Michigan, the weather holds for the dive team. With their depth finder, they relocate the large object Jerry Geyer found 300 feet below.
When I knew this was a big target on the bottom, at least 200 feet long, I thought it could have been the LR Doty, but I also thought it could have been other ships lost.
Just begun to scratch the surface of this wreck.
The search team was composed of 3 of the Great Lakes' most experienced wreck divers. Tracy Zolowski is diving with traditional open-circuit scuba gear.
Feeling good.
John Jansen and John Scholes carry out final checks on their rebreathers.
Yep, feeling good.
These closed-circuit breathing systems remove carbon dioxide and replenish oxygen, allowing longer bottom time than regular scuba. The rebreather also produces no bubbles that might stir up a blinding cloud of silt when a diver enters a wreck.
John Jansen, John Scholes, and myself were the first team down. And at about 250 feet, you could start to see the wreck. We were hooked right at the stern, right over the boiler room. And we knew then that we had our work cut out for us.
The wreck is wrapped in a gray cloak made from millions of living creatures. Quagga mussels. Not native to the U.S., this invasive hitchhiker from ocean-going vessels colonized much of Lake Michigan and covers almost every surface of the deep water wreck. The divers pass over cargo holds as they work their way to the bow. Out of the darkness looms a possible clue. Wheelbarrows, used to carry coal on steamships, like the Doty. They reached the bow. Where Tracy Zolowski found what he was looking for on the port side. There, after more than 100 years, is the name. Doty, miraculously spared by the quagga mussels. They had done it. The team had found the LR Doty. The pilot house on the section of the bow that bore the ship's name was completely flipped over. The waves that tore the bow in two also stripped the Doty's decks.
Something swept the deck clean. There's almost nothing on the whole deck.
You know, the 30-footers here could easily wash off cabin off of a ship. These storms here are as bad or even sometimes worse than out on the ocean.
Not wanting to push her own luck with the Great Lakes weather, Yitka headed to Milwaukee, where the divers share their find with a man whose painstaking research pinpointed where to look.
See the LR Doty?
Oh my God. Oh, there it is. Wow.
Now you know what this thing is, huh?
This is something. Seeing the name for the first time.
And the letters are very beautiful.
Wow. Well, that seals it. It's her.
But their find opened up two new mysteries. Why did the powerful and majestic LR Doty end up on the floor of Lake Michigan? And how did the older, sail-powered Olive Jeanette and her cook manage to survive? Brendan and the dive team wrestled with difficult questions that came to light in the video evidence from the wreck of the LR Doty.
Is it still affixed to its original location, or is it torn free and moved down the deck?
We can tell it's...
Okay, but it's upright.
Could the Doty's sinking have something to do with the vessel she was towing, the Olive Jeanette?
This chain will go to the bridle.
Kip Files is captain of a sailing schooner similar to the Olive Jeanette. He's aboard a modern tugboat as the crew sets up the tow line to a barge.
Push us away from the mooring, then we'll roll the tug away from the barge and put it under tow.
Kip's trying to imagine what it would have been like a century ago when the steam-powered Doty was towing the sail-powered Olive Jeanette.
They might have had something like a capstan that looks similar to this, steam-driven instead of hydraulically driven. The reason he's letting out the tow wire is so the vessel can maneuver. Now, this is probably very close to what the Doty had to do to get the Jeanette off the dock and stuff. This is the type of maneuvering they would have had to have done. And watch as this cable starts to come up and take tension. Watch the forces involved. Now, feel this vessel stop. Feel it?
But in 1898, the LR Doty would have had to make do with a single 6-inch rope hawser attached to a single post in the Olive Jeanette's bow, instead of a tow wire with ropes fastened to each corner of the barge.
That's known as the bridle, so it can pull efficiently. If it was just on one side or the other, if it was on the far corner, you'd pull, and it would pull that barge around, and the barge would want to go that way. If it was on this corner, you'd be pulling, it would want to go that way. So if you pull the centered effort, see the bridle there?
In spite of these shortcomings, the Doty steamed through the night, towing the Olive Jeanette with its single 6-inch rope hawser. The advancing low-pressure system tested the rope's strength.
We had counterclockwise rotation around the low-pressure center, and it was deepening. Once it traveled over the Great Lakes, it picked up all of that latent energy from Lake Michigan, which is warm, moist air, to feed that storm.
The Doty and her charge sailed straight into the Great Lakes equivalent of the perfect storm, what locals call a weather bomb. But commercial vessels, then as now, have different priorities than fishermen or pleasure boats. They're paid to keep going and deliver cargoes on time. At around 5 p.m., the wind abruptly shifts direction. Instead of pushing both ships north towards their destination, it's now hitting them in the bow. The waves grew taller and taller. 30 to 40 mile-an-hour winds howled down over the length of Lake Michigan, sending steep waves 20 feet high. Pounding waves caused the tow line to suddenly tighten and then slacken. It's called shock loading.
They're trying to avoid that, so one's not coming up on a wave, you're coming down. You pace it? Is that the term?
In step.
In step, okay. So in step. So you would try to get them so they're both riding up and down the waves.
Together, yep.
If you couldn't do that, there would be a tremendous amount of shock load.
Absolutely.
Right.
To find out the effect of that shock loading, Kip Files visits a modern rope manufacturer. A scaled-down model of the rope used to tow the Olive Jeanette was placed in a test bed. It's designed to simulate wave action.
So
So now in its first cycle, it's just coming up past 1,000 pounds. That's 1,200 pounds, and now it's going to relax.
So that represents the shock of the vessel coming back.
Yep.
The
So you can
shock
kind of
between the
see
two
the
vessels.
The test approaches the 1 hour mark.
Now we're upwards of 61, 62 waves.
Right.
And
bang.
And bang, there it goes.
She broke just like you told me she would, right here at the turn, right at the capstan.
Right.
That's where the weak spot was.
So we've lost one strand at that particular load. Now, if there were another wave, you can imagine where we're going to go next.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it's not going to...
Once one goes, it's domino effect.
So they're not going to, and they may not have known that.
The LR Doty was about 7 miles north of Milwaukee when the tow line broke between her and the Olive Jeanette.
Freed from the dead weight of the Olive Jeanette, the large steamship should have survived. Perhaps the wreck itself may show why the Doty went down. To Brendan and the dive team, the wide-open deck hatches strongly suggest how the Doty met her fate.
What I would expect to happen is the water weight on the hatch covers caused them to collapse inward, and she found her quickly, and the air rushed back into the stern and literally blew that house right off the top. It's likely that some of these sailors were alive when this ship hit the bottom of the lake.
Sinking by the stern in 300 feet of water, the Doty would have touched bottom soon after her bow left the surface.
And it suggests that the ship, when she dug into the lake bottom, had to be nearly vertical on her descent.
Because the rudder is, although it's hard to port, it's not damaged. It's not smashed in, it's not splintered, it seems to be intact.
The position of the rudder provided another clue about the final moments of the LR Doty.
The fact that that rudder is cocked hard to one side would suggest they were probably trying to turn out of the trough of the waves and just had the wheel hard to one side.
Turning a 300-foot vessel around in heavy seas is a move no captain would want to make. But perhaps Captain Smith and the Doty could see no other option.
There wasn't just a barge behind him. There were lives back there. And I'm sure he's thinking about his own vessel, but he's also thinking about, oh my God, what are these guys going to do? And they're my responsibility. I'm the towboat. I mean, he could have made the effort to go around, and that turn might have done him in.
Alone now, the Olive Jeanette and her crew were at the mercy of the wind and waves.
The only thing to steady this vessel is to put a sail on, and the only sail he tried to get on was a staysail, which would have been a smaller sail in the bow to turn so she could steer. So now you're trying to surf and stay on. Waves would have crashed over the stern. Waves, and she would have picked up so much speed coming down the back end of waves that her bow would have gone underwater.
The Olive Jeanette's forward cabin is ripped off and washed away.
It would be like having a normal-sized backdoor swimming pool being dumped on your head every 18 seconds.
After 48 hours, the storm finally blows itself out. The ship has been pushed back south, almost to her starting point. 2 days later, Frankie Waters tells her story to a reporter under the assumed name of Frances Brown, thus delivering to Brendan Baylod the clue he needed to find the LR Doty.
We really did find this wreck. We've solved the mystery. This is her.